Dear ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Wilfried Martin Center, welcome to our new episode of Thinking Talks. My name is Peter Hefle, I'm the Policy Director of the Martin Center. Well, what keeps Western policymakers awake at night? It might be Russia, might be Iran, Israel now, Palestine, or long-term issues such as climate change and migration. But one topic is for sure, that's China, or to be more precise, the People's Republic of China, and there's a second China, the Republic of China, better known as Taiwan. The heated debate in Europe on our own geopolitical role is very much linked and related to the disrupting force of China, the rise of China, and during our thinking talks, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to dig a bit deeper into these various dimensions of this phenomena. And for this topic, Madame Niquet, je suis very happy to have you here. And well, you are the most renowned French expert, as we say in our community, an old hand on China. But you have not only worked on China, it's Taiwan, it's Eastern Asia, Japan in particular. So that's the working area. You have worked with many institutions, renowned institutions in France, and you're currently with the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, one of the most renowned think tanks in Paris. So we're dealing a bit about the Taiwan issue. Not only, I think we have to take into account the wider East Asian region, because many of these dimensions are closely related to a dynamic we have to better understand here on European soil. Well, shocked by the economic threat of China, the dependency on China in many issues, there's a claim in Europe to decouple or at least to de-risk from this huge power. What do you think? Is this a realistic perspective? Can we really disentangle from our close relations we have built over the last 40 years? Or are we simply focusing too much on the economic dimension? Are there many other dimensions we should as seriously take?
I think that de-risking is a right word, much better than decoupling. Decoupling is, in my view, not realistic for Europe. But de-risking is good because it shows that we want to go on doing business with China. After all, China is, I recognize it as an economic competitor, of course, but we are doing business with China for many companies. China and China market and even Chinese investments are vital. And so decoupling, no, de-risking, yes, and we need it because for too many years we have been extremely naive on China. And we have a huge deficit with China. The rebalancing is not coming near, except maybe for countries like Germany, but even for Germany, it's becoming more difficult. So I think de-risking, definitely. We must try to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of debates is currently now on internal fragility, on internal weakness. On one hand, we see China as the ever-rising, never-ending success story. On the other side, we hear a lot of news about the real estate market and rising debt, people not being satisfied, and COVID was a good or bad example. So do you think that we have overestimated the strength of China? Do we not look enough into the fragility and the possible outcomes of this?
Well, I think that we are realizing now that no countries can rise forever. And definitely China is facing a turning point. And that turning point maybe has been accelerated by the policy decided by Xi Jinping in power since 2013, 2012 now. And he did everything in his power to constrain the Chinese economy. His policy, perceived as aggressive, led to US sanctions, less access to rich markets that China absolutely needs, less transfer of technology, less investments. On all this has been basically the doing of China itself, because the EU and the US, they were still very eager to go on doing business as usual with China. It's not the case anymore. We still want to do business with China, but being very much more cautious than we used to be, doing business with a country that doesn't seem to be as full of opportunities and even problematic for some companies as it was before.
closely related. You remember last week they celebrated 10 years of Belt and Road Initiative. Is this the success story, or is now more shadowed?
In a way, it's a success story. Yeah. And we must recognize that China succeeded with the Belt and Road Initiative towards, let's say, the global south, because there was a void left by former colonial powers in Europe, for instance, being the European and American, of course, being much more disinterested in Africa, for instance, than it was the case during the Cold War. So China, in a way, filled the gap. Africa has known a 5% growth in recent years, until recently, thanks to mostly Chinese investments, and they built infrastructure. So in a sense, we must recognize that, and it has been a sort of success stories for some countries. But it's also the debt trap that countries have encountered because of China. And now we see that China is facing its own problem and is putting far less money in the Belt and Road Initiative that they claim they would do before.
Let us go a bit back to the geopolitics. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was immediately the discussion, has this any impact on the cross-trade relation? That means China's policy versus Taiwan. We are very much about concern if you look into the military numbers, and the dates and years often mentioned as symbolic years. How do you think has China perceived the West now from a more weakness perspective? Do they consider us as not really willing to stand up for the democracy in Taiwan?
I'm not sure about that, and I think that China, of course, is claiming its special friendship or no-limit friendship with Russia. China is also observing very cautiously what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. If Russia wins, of course, it will be a great plus for China, including vis-à-vis Taiwan. But until now, China has been surprised by the reaction of European powers, US, of course, in terms of sanctions. And China is extremely vulnerable to sanctions. You know, if we cut China access to SWIFT, for instance, they would be in a very problematic situation, because a large part of their growth still comes from foreign markets and not from the Chinese markets. Plus, they saw the difficulties that the Russians had to invade Ukraine, and they realized suddenly that kind of military operation is not as easy as maybe some people inside the PLA or around Xi Jinping thought before that experience.
The Belt and Road Initiative is often seen as a part of a new world order. China and Russia and other forces would like to replace the old Western order led by the United States. We have seen runs into the Middle East, for example, bargaining and a kind of dialogue between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now we will see how it will play out in the Middle East, in the Palestine questions, but nonetheless, China has clearly announced that it is willing to build up a new world order. How seriously should we take this? Can it really replace the order of 1945, for example?
I don't think so, but this is true that with that discourse on a new, more democratic world order, Chinese is trying to impose its own vision of the world according to its own interest. It's not completely new, going back to Bandung and all these things. I mean, this discourse, actually, there is a continuity in the Chinese discourse from Mao times until today. They want to change the world, and now they have more capacity to influence and disinform in a way, building their own set of rules or norms. I'm not sure they will be very successful, because many countries realize that these norms come also with conditionalities, contrary to what China says. But China definitely gave more opportunity to middle powers or the global south.
And remains the role of Europe to play. What would you suggest to European policymakers in this respect?
Well, focusing on China is definitely important, even though we have a lot to do with Russia already. And I think that we were on a good track when the new policy of the European Union regarding China, regarding Asia, the strategic vision for Asia is in the right direction. Of course, with a bigger and bigger European Union, sometimes you have divergences, and we could discuss, but I'm not a specialist of Europe, so I will let that to to the one working really on the European Union to maybe elaborate more on this issue.
Thank you so much, Madam Niquet, for being here with us, discussing and giving you some insights of your long experience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your interest in this Thinking Talks. This is an episode, but only one episode. We will continue with a lot of international, but also European-related topics. You can find this session and many others on our YouTube channel.